you, Zoom, for letting us know that the recording is in progress. All right, so hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Michelle Levesque. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I am the director of the Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality here at St. Paul University, and I'm also an assistant professor in the program or in the school. So we'll begin with a territorial acknowledgement. So Kwe Kakina, hello everyone. Pija Shig, welcome. So we would like to acknowledge that St. Paul University is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabeg Algonquin people. We would like to honor the Anishinaabeg, the first peoples of the lands and waters of the Kichisibi, Ottawa River Valley from time immemorial. We acknowledge that the site of the city of Ottawa serves as the home of the Anishinaabeg, as a place for spiritual ceremonies, cultural gatherings, and exchanges among First Peoples. Today, this spirit of peace and friendship is the foundation of relationships among Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples from around the globe. So I also want to say a little bit about the speakers series itself. So the series, Being a Leader, or Lunchtime Conversations, offers an opportunity to reflect with organizational and community leaders around the challenges of social transformation in a complex world, and to share a better appreciation around the resources that we can rely on to act in this complex world. So it's organized by the school, Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality, as mentioned. So I want to, before we go to our distinguished guest, just a few reminders before we start. So as you may have already heard, this conversation will be recorded and added to our YouTube channel. So we will be sending out a link after the event so that if you would like to watch this conversation again or the others that are on our YouTube channel, that would be great. We invite you to keep your webcam open, but also feel comfortable to keep your webcam closed. Also, don't hesitate to send your questions and or reflections in the chat throughout the conversation, and we'll have time for questions and answers following the conversation with our invited leader. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, I should say, Michael Seguin, who will now go ahead and present our speaker for this afternoon.
Well, hello everyone. Good to see you all. Good to see you, Greg. So Greg Kennedy is a Jesuit priest and a spiritual director at the Ignatius Jesuit Center in Guelph. He is also a philosopher, an ecologist, and a poet. So a lot of various identities that I will have the pleasure to discover a bit more with him this afternoon. And he is also the author of many books, including Refostered Psalm. Sorry, I'm bad. Oh no, it's because of the screen. That way. Okay. Well, anyway, writer of many books, and including also amazing friendships between animals and saints. And so before we start, I think you will share with us one of your Refostered Psalm, Greg. Yeah.
Yes. Why not? We'll try that. I'll share my screen here. I can't do this without the art of Lorraine Roy, who's illustrated the book. Not, I guess I shouldn't say illustrated. She's donated some of her extraordinary art. She's a good friend, and she allowed me to use her art in this book. So what I did, I tried to remain somewhat faithful to what I would call the emotional core of the Psalms. The Psalms are wonderful. I mean, they're hard to read and they're very distasteful at times, but they express all the whole gamut of human emotion. And so what I tried to do was remain faithful to that emotive core, and then use different language and bring it up to what I was feeling, how I thought that emotion might be expressed today. So I might do two if time allows. Anyway, this is Psalm 130. I'll just give you a little bit of what the original says. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that you may be revered. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, etc. You probably know it. Anyways, I should share my, pop this up a little bit bigger. So this is the so-called reupholstered version. From the depths I cry to you, O God, where my molten self sends sliding and colliding a tectonic consciousness that I constantly mistake as terra firma, immovable and solid to the core. So little do I know of me, this upper crust enthroned like the naked emperor with his back to every mirror, terrified of the truth of his most basic body. A longing so amorphous, so undefinable moves between my thin thinking continents and the fiery elemental liquids floating them. I ache in geological time for understanding, for something like the primordial unity of energy and matter. More than the sun longs for the earth, in the final tailspin consummation, I long a knowing for you, author of all life, of all resolute enigmas. So God to me is kind of that resolute enigma. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll just give you a slightly more. Alleluia is a wonderful word. It literally means praise God in Hebrew, of course, and it's pretty much only found in the Psalms. The word is also makes a brief appearance in its Greek form in the book of Revelation, but pretty much if we didn't have the Psalms, we wouldn't have this wonderful word, Alleluia. I'm a great Leonard Cohen fan, and we all know that terribly overdone song that Leonard Cohen said he kind of rued the day that he composed it because it became so abused in every funeral, every wedding, every whatever. Children talent show had Alleluia. Anyway, praise the Lord. How good it is, Alleluia. How good it is to sing praises to our God, for he is gracious and a song of praise is fitting. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars. He gives them all their names. Sing to the Lord with thanksgiving. Make melody to our God on the lyre. So that's the original, of course. And here is what Lorraine and I came up with. Alleluia. How good it is to stretch thus the mouth after hours, sometimes days of cramped, unsmiling mutters. Every other minute, listen up, Israel. The tongue needs renewing. It grows old so fast in the company of curmudgeon words. Within a breath, it becomes a dry yardstick that keeps a cowering mind unkindly quiet. But the Lord restores. She's always at it. The master mason edifying speech into palaces and cathedrals of such spacious amplitude that all things said echo amply. She's always at it. Happy farmhand whistling sentimental love songs whilst mucking out the barn, chatting up both birds and scarecrow in the patchwork fields she's sowing. So blurt out praise, all you silent subway commuters. Let your lips release a big fat hosanna, pausing an 8th beat to note how it feels. Take the cat out of the bag and make it purr a funky bass line, then sock it to the ears of all those who hear a whooping, show-stopping hallelujah. Because God is word, word is soul, soul is sung, so sing it strong above all the brass and backup splaring. So let that be our.
What a wonderful way to start. Thank you so much, Greg. So my first question would be, who are you? If you had to introduce to, well, an audience that does not know you, or how would you describe yourself?
I would love, hopefully it doesn't sound too presumptuous, but I'd love to call myself a poet. And I'm not quite sure if being published makes you a poet, or writing poetry makes you a poet, or looking at the world in a certain way makes you a poet. Hopefully it's the latter. If I can look at the world with poetic eyes, that's what I'd love to be. A poet who sees detail. And when I say detail, I mean detail has to do with incarnation, I think. And if God so loved the world that God wanted to become part of the world, it's in order to to see the divine in the detail, not the devil, but the divine in the detail.
The divine.
So yeah, and a poet is able to see detail. And this is somewhat new for me because I studied philosophy, a lot of philosophy, and a lot of philosophy, of course, is very cerebral, and it might be hard, like hard facts or analysis, but detail often gets lost, or the kind of the material detail gets lost in philosophy often. I mean, Plato says it well, you know, that the soul is imprisoned in the body. And if that's our stance, that somehow we have to break free of the body and break free of materiality in order to get to the ideals, all that lovely detail that we live every day becomes devalued and unperceived. And that seems like a great loss to me. So my whole, I guess recently, my whole quest is to regain the enchantment of detail and really live it out.
Wow. And what kind of details especially are you interested in? I mean, I know you're really involved also as an ecologist. So, I mean, is it all kind of details, what you find in nature, human nature? What
Yeah.
specific details do matter for you?
Well, that's a very good question, because I mean, there are all kinds of details. And the very fact that our senses kind of weed out certain things, because if we were to actually consciously take in everything that we perceive, everything that hits our senses, we'd be totally overwhelmed. So obviously there's filtration of detail. But certainly more and more I think as many people are feeling these days, with, you know, COVID has rocked our world, you could say, and has sent us back to what is basically what we think is most healing and most necessary both in our culture, but in our lives. So what we might say an ecological literacy or natural literacy. I walk through the woods, and so I'm embarrassed to say I don't know all the names of the trees. So this kind of detail, where I think like, wow, I'm kind of illiterate in many ways in terms of the natural world. We ran a retreat here. I work at the Ignatius Jesuit Center, which is in Guelph, Ontario. A lovely spot. We have 600 acres of organic farmland, wetland, forest. And 2 weeks ago, we ran a retreat just on trees. So typically we've done in the past Ignatian Spirituality retreats, which are wonderful. But my hope was to bring people that would never come to a Catholic retreat house because of the associations they have with Catholicism or whatever, and invite them just to fall in love with nature. So I was able to make friends and to procure a man named Byron Murray, who is a local Guelph naturalist, and again, a master of detail. We went on some like preparatory walks, and we would stop every 5 feet, and he would say, look at this. And we'd get down our hands and knees, and he would put something in his mouth that he found on the ground and say, that's a very interesting. But again, just a master of detail. And he totally enchanted the 37 people that were on this retreat. His enthusiasm was contagious. So those kind of details, and in fact, just the detail of everything. The more I kind of go on this spiritual journey, I'm figuring, well, to live everything deeply as possible, the good and the bad, the ugly, but to feel that deeply and not to be afraid of any of it. Obviously, we have a choice on what we do with that raw data, but to feel that raw data deeply and not reject it out of hand.
And how is, you're talking about the spiritual journey, you're talking about the details, knowing knowing where we live, being part of nature. So how are those parts related? Are spirituality related to nature or to us being there? How do you see that?
Well, this is, again, another good question, because I kind of, you could say, excised or removed all the explicit religious content from this retreat. And yet it was completely there. You can't really have a spirit, you can't be out on the land and not feel the majesty of God. I mean, if the creator, the creator is so creative and marvelous in God's creation. So if we were really present, I think, to the natural world, we would feel this naturally. I think because we have been removed and we've lost that literacy, it's hard to read God's God's poetry in nature. I mean, we get a sense of it, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful mountain, but were we able, much more, if our literacy was higher, we would just be enraptured, I think, pretty much all the time. And I think, again, with some of this renaissance of indigenous spirituality, indigenous knowledge, land-based knowledge is teaching us that, like, we lost a lot and we are kind of regaining it. And that's where the beauty of the challenge is. How do we regain this in a way that helps us all go forward?
And I know that you're working with First Nation elders in the Ignatius Center, in the forest and everything. And so how do you deal with that, with, coming with this, Jesuit identity, Catholic identity, and that to some extent work a lot to dissociate us from nature and from those very anchored knowledge keepers who are finally saying that to some extent you got it wrong within Catholicism. I mean, it's not the all of tradition that is wrong, but a big part of it might be wrong. Or if I'm wrong in the way I frame it, tell me, but how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, maybe it's kind of wrong-headed interpretations of the tradition, perhaps. Again, you can use the Bible, you could use the tradition as a sword to cut it any which way you want. Ignatius himself, what's wonderful about Ignatian spirituality is that it's very world-affirming. That Ignatius thought that the way I like to explain it is, he said, evil in the world is basically the enemy of our human nature. So when things go wrong, we're giving into the enemy of our human nature. And so if that's the case, if our human nature is by definition good, and the enemy is what takes us away from that primordial goodness, that original goodness. So it's very, very positive. It doesn't see the world as a vale of tears. It doesn't see the world as a place, a prison we have to escape. It's the very site where the divine happens, where the divine takes root and acts. And so the spiritual quest is to listen very, very carefully. Have your ears constantly to the ground, listening for how God's acting. So in that sense, I guess we kind of misinterpreted that, or went away from that original kind of vision of holism, a kind of holistic vision of this is actually very good, and our constant harping on sin and fallenness. Well, very true. I mean, there's parts of us that are broken, and I mean, existentially, we lack. We all know we lack. We're not perfect. We can't do what we want to do all the time. We didn't create ourselves. But to think that primordially we're at the very core and the very base, we're good. And if we listen to that, God is acting through us. I mean, that's very affirming. And we can go, I think we can use that and say, okay, let's build on that. And then when we build on that, we recognize our freedom, according to Ignatius. And the whole point of Ignatian spirituality is freedom, inner freedom, so that we're not what he would call yanked this way and that by inordinate attachments. I mean, the Buddhists use the similar words, the inordinate attachments that we mistake for idols, I guess, or that we somehow give too much power to, and then they become centers of our lives when they're not really centers. That doesn't mean they're not beautiful, but when they become centers of our lives, they generate anxiety, worry, rather than peace and security.
And so when we connect with this fundamental goodness and this quest of inner freedom, you feel that it's possible to connect with other spiritualities, including First Nations, Buddhism. That was your experience?
That's my personal experience. I've been very, very much influenced by Buddhism, and I have a long-standing yoga practice. I don't see them. I mean, I guess I'm mostly versed in Buddhism and obviously Christianity, but I see Christianity and Buddhism as complementary, and almost, I wouldn't want to say necessarily so, but I mean, I don't know where my faith would be without a kind of a solid Buddhist teaching in meditation. And again, Buddhism is very, very positive. We have this Buddha nature, and we forget and we stray, and we get caught up in all kinds of egotistical things and the protection of ourselves. And we lose, and ultimately, paradoxically, we lose ourselves because we're so caught up in securing ourselves.
Yeah. And what else did you learn from Buddhism?
Well, to take it easy, to kind of to enjoy ourselves, right? My father, the constant refrain of growing up from my father was, "Greg, lighten up." I think I was a rather serious and somber child, and I probably am still serious and somber in many ways. But I mean, Buddhism there's a certain levity in that. You often see statues of the Buddha with a big smile on his face, or at least a little grin. And I mean, pardon the old phrase, but shit happens, so big deal. I mean, work with it. That's and so also change, right? So one of the principles of Buddhism is impermanence. So working with impermanence, and sometimes when we want these solid eternal structures, and we forget that things change, that can cause a lot of suffering, and because we're holding on, trying to maintain what's unsustainable in a sense. And I think again we're coming up to on a global sense, holding on to fossil fuels. We're holding on to capitalism. That's obviously the way it's kind of rampant capitalism. It's not working for anyone. So we're holding on to these structures that no longer serve us. And so how do we have the courage to let go? And again, so Ignatian spirituality, Buddhism is freedom. How can we just look at reality square in the face and say what's actually necessary here and now, and not in the past or not in the future, but here and now.
Wow, what you're saying is very interesting, because I would like to bring you a little more on the ecological ground. So oftentimes in your writing, or when we did talk together for this interview, you talk about an ecological conversion. So what do you mean? Because it's interesting, because the word conversion is really religiously connoted. So what do you mean when you talk about ecological conversion?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the phrase is not mine. Actually, Pope John Paul II coined it, I guess. He was the first one to use it, to my knowledge anyway. And then it was taken up by Benedict, and most recently, most powerfully by Francis in Laudato Si. Yeah. I mean, conversion is literally to turn around. And so, I mean, maybe that word I mentioned before earlier, like a renaissance, is maybe a better way to think of it. I mean, to be reborn, literally. And so, again, if all the seeds of goodness and wisdom are in us, how do we allow them to be reborn? And so it does bring us back, in a sense. Again, the whole notion of I guess this is probably a Jungian archetype, that we go out and then we do our stuff, but we got to come back. And it seems like historically, at least the West has gone out, it's done all kinds of interesting, crazy, impressive and terrible things, and now maybe it's got to come back. And so, I mean, I think often the importance of the prodigal son and father parable, and if we can think of in terms of the earth, so we've been the prodigal species. We've gone out. Again, we've made all kinds of incredible discoveries, and we've expanded our consciousness. Can we come back and really be embraced by the earth and the Creator in this humility that says, listen, I went astray. Take me back. I'll be your slave, basically. And then in the parable, the father says, no, lift him up. You're not my slave, you're my son. And I think the earth itself is just longing. It's just out there like the father. The earth is just waiting for our return. And it's going to take us to say, we've gone wrong. We went astray. And so how do we come to that point of saying, I need to convert, I need to be reborn, and in fact return to our parent to allow that rebirth to happen. Again, it's all metaphorical, of course, but we need to be reborn. I mean, Jesus says that to Nicodemus, unless you're reborn of the Spirit, in a sense, we're going to keep doing the same old stuff. So, I mean, great that we're making electric vehicles, but if our spirit and our consciousness is not somehow converted and reborn, we're going to have the same problem. we're just burning a world. Well, again, if it's just consumption, but now it's electric consumption, not fossil fuel consumption, it's the same old story. We haven't learned our lesson in a sense. And the lesson is a spiritual lesson, I think.
Wow. And so what do we need to do concretely, really, to be reborn, to come back to the earth, to come back to this idea that we're not, dominating over the creation, but we're part of it? What does it entails concretely for you?
Well, that's a tough one. And again, I think it involves a bit of grace. We can't do it ourselves, and we can't demand that it's done. Because if we were to go and say, now I'm going to go seek conversion, I mean, that's just another kind of colonial, I want conversion now, I'm going to go get it. I mean, it's just the same old stuff, right? So we've got to do it in a way that's, in a way that allows us to open to the surprising, I think. And that's perhaps the most challenging stance on life, to be open, so that we're neither, well, Ignatius said it well, I mean, to remain balanced as if like a scale. And so if we can maintain that balance, then somehow the divine is going to weigh us one way or the other, and we can go that way. So concretely, I mean, we have to live, obviously, in this world. We have to eat, we have to do things. But how do we do? And everyone has a potential. I mean, I'm a bachelor, I don't have children. So, I mean, my life is a little simpler than many people's. And so I can do things that I can get around on my bike because I don't have 3 kids to cart around, for example. So everyone has to assess themselves and look at their life, examine, which is another good Ignatian term, examine how we live, and say that we're only here for such a short time. And even in the shadow of extinction, which it seems very real and ever more so, how do we live well now? I mean, we're all going to die. This is something that's I've thought about a long, long time. What's the difference between extinction and personal death? Like if we all go out in the great shebang, or we each underividually go gently into that good night. I don't know, is there a difference? And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I still don't know where I stand in that. But regardless, I mean, I have to live the allotted time I've got well, and I want to be contributing to something rather than destroying something. So every little decision I can make, I can either do it that's going to help or hinder the process. Jean-Paul Sartre said that we were never more free than under Nazi occupation. He said that while in Paris in the Second World War, in a sense, because everything becomes heightened, right? When there's this occupying force, every little decision can either be resistance or resignation. And I think we're in that same situation with the ecological situation. It is kind of an occupying force. So either everything I do can be resistance against that occupation, mental occupation and physical occupation, or is it resignation, like what I do doesn't matter, I'll just do what everyone else is doing. Or I try to say every time I take my bike rather than drive is actually a bit of resistance. Every time I buy organic, for example, is a little resistance. Again, maybe it's not these grand things, but that's where it has to start. If we don't actually believe, we're never going to act. I mean, belief.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we're back to where we started with the attention to detail. So every action that we make is an occasion to think about, are we in resisting, or are we reproducing the systems? But what's the role of leaders in that context? I mean, in your case, you're a spiritual director, and you're also a priest, so you're a spiritual leader. So, what can leaders do to help in this new needed awareness, conversion, or renaissance?
Yeah, perhaps the thing that comes right down to mind is the understanding, and that there's no one size fits all solution to all this. So what each one of us can contribute has to be, as it were, tailor made. So that's very important to have a kind of compassion, because these final solutions that are kind of universal and apply to all are very, very dangerous. And I think we saw that with the great things out of socialism. Socialism, you think like, what? This is a wonderful, and then in the details, it gets botched time and again. And I look at South America with such dismay that Nicaragua now, all these positive social experiments in socialism just have become dictatorships in a sense. So perhaps I'm straying. So we have to be careful, I guess, with our spirit and with our souls. So leaders have to be understanding and compassionate first and foremost, and know that their job is to empower others, basically, and so that the others can have their agency. And again, in the Catholic Church, what's been hard for me as a priest is often so much power is put onto the priest and taken away from the laity. So how do we empower others? Of course, the elections are coming up in Ontario, at least. So again, what do we vote? Where do we vote? Do we vote out of fear because if I really like the Greens but I don't think they're going to win, I better vote for the Liberals because strategically I don't want the PCs to come back? Or again, how do we live out without fear and just go for what we believe? So yeah, the leadership. Maybe I've never been comfortable with leadership, but maybe something.
And that's something that came out also in our conversation previously. That you're not that you do accompany a lot of people, but you do not feel that much a leader. Why is it that way?
Good question. A good question. Maybe it's changing, but this is kind of personal, I suppose. All my life, I've never felt like competent in much. I just kind of, I wouldn't say floated, but yeah, I felt like I've kind of lacked agency or competence in certain things. I think that's changing, but it's perhaps a role I'm coming in maybe later in life, and again trying to be open, trying to be like that scale, and just say, okay, put myself at the use of something higher and see what happens.
Yeah, it's fascinating because one of our previous guests in this series had a bit of the same feeling, and she's an amazing woman having a huge impact on the life of, let's say, 100 employees, but she felt that she was not a leader. So maybe there's something about interesting leaders who don't feel that they are a leader. But and just this last piece that I would like to connect to that too is that how do you connect? You're not so comfortable with leadership, but how do you connect that to spirituality? How do you connect accompaniment of people with spirituality?
Well, I guess as a spiritual director, we're taught first and foremost that God is the one who's leading here, and the spiritual director is a good spiritual director. Basically, gets out of the way, so it opens up that space, that clearing, where the directee, again, it's not great language, but the directee is able to find how God is leading her. So her or him, of course, or they. So it's kind of a negative leadership, you could sense, or you're leading in a way that's disappearing. It's a leadership absentia. So I'm very comfortable with that because I mean I feel like I can listen well. I feel like I can ask some good questions. And here again, my philosophical background has helped me a lot. I think in spiritual direction, where asking a good question questioning is remarkable. I mean, questioning is just so beautiful, and all kinds of things can open up with a good question. And I mean, the more I think about spiritual direction, it's kind of dialogical in the way that Socrates tried to elicit truth from. He believed that truth was resident inside of us, and so all that we have to do is through conversation allow it to come out. And then when we realize it, to say, oh, okay, I kind of knew that all along, in a sense. So when I guess that maybe that's a leader, right? Socrates was a great leader, but the great leader allows the person to say, oh, I kind of knew that all along, and I can trust that now in a way that I couldn't trust it before. So really encouraging people I mean, I guess that's encouraging, as in instilling courage in people so that they can trust themselves. They can trust how God is operating. And I mean, I guess as a spiritual director, so often, I mean, I'm a spiritual director. I have my own spiritual director whom I go see regularly. And he does for me what I do for others. When I feel like I'm on the rocks, as it were, he carries me with his own trust. He can see in me more than I can see in myself at that time. And the same thing with here, when people come to see me, I know that God is, I mean, I just feel it so palpably that God is working with these people. They can't see it themselves. So my job is to trust where they can't trust. And it's really, I mean, that's, so it increases my faith, my confidence, my courage. And in that sense, I can encourage them, empower them to say, no, just trust. It's so apparent that God is here.
I feel it's really connected to servant leadership at the end of the day, because you're really there to empower people, help them identify where God is at work in their life, trust in themselves, trust that even in harsh moments, some good things will come out of it too. So this is really important, and I think that's something that we did not emphasize enough in the role of leadership. You know, this confidence in others that they can do it.
Yeah, definitely. And the last thing we need is arrogance, or someone who thinks that I've got the answers. And again, a spiritual director who thinks he's got the answers is the worst thing. It's the most dangerous thing alive. We've seen that again with clerics, with all politicians. Yeah. They've got the answers. It's bad news.
Wow. Well, I think that it's not time for the question and answer period. Lauren, there's still so much to ask, but I would like for others to be able to ask their questions directly to Greg.
Great, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Greg, for your thoughtful answers to the questions that were asked. So I am meant to be facilitating this conversation, but we're a fairly small group. So if you'd just like to use the raise your hand function in Brightspace, and then I'll call on the attendees if you have a particular question. I did see that there were some questions already posed in the chat. So I don't know, Jean, if you would like to begin by asking your questions to Greg directly.
Sure. I'm aware that Guelph, there at the Ignatian Center in years past, like 25 years ago, had a CSA food box program in care of the land. As a farmer and as a biodynamic practitioner, really important piece of it is mysticism, actually. It's knowing and being aware of spirit care of the land. And so wondering, does the center still continue with its food box program, the CSA program? And are you out in the gardens using, as you say it should happen, using compost to happen as well? And yes, how you're connected to that?
Yes, yes to all the above. So good. I'm just looking out the window now and seeing the farmers out there going at it. They're transplanting seedlings from the greenhouse to the fields today. The last 2 years, I was able to be out there because of COVID. The retreat house was closed, so I was able to be out in the fields, which is where I love. This year, we've opened again as a retreat house, and it's required more of my time indoors. Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. That's kind of my main responsibility, so I can't shirk it to be outside. But yeah, so we have a CSA. We've got various shares that people can buy, either the long-term share or the shorter-term share. It's all 100% organic certified. And we also rent, because we have so much land, we rent to some very, very interesting entrepreneurs, you could say. We have a native plant nursery run by a man named Alex, and it's going very, very well, Origin Native Plants. We've got 2 people that are looking into permaculture-esque orchards and gardens. We have people that plant garlic, quite a large volume of garlic. So yeah, lots of interesting things are happening. A couple of people, herbalists who are planting on the farm here. And we're always looking to expand in the sense that expand our partnerships and have people that really love the land be here. We don't have any biodynamics. Unfortunately, we don't have any animals, so that makes biodynamics slightly difficult. I did work I volunteered on a biodynamic farm in Quebec, and I was just bowled over by the capacity, and the soil was like chocolate cake. I couldn't believe the richness of the soil. And so I was completely won over by biodynamics. The evidence was there that you take care of the land and it takes care of you. So yeah, it would be interesting to explore that more in the future. So I think we have about 200 shares currently in our CSA.
And the importance of you there at a center that has the capacity to help educate, teach, and talk to people about it, how wonderful that is. And I really appreciate that. Thank you for it. And keep going, do more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel the same way that, as good as all this stuff is going on here, I feel like we're only at like 30% capacity. We've got so much more that we could do here. And so again, inviting others to kind of make that happen, and spreading out that leadership is so important, I think.
Great, thank you, Jean. I see that Bianca, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you, and thank you for this dialogue. It has been so insightful for me, and I wanted to ask you a little bit whether what I really appreciated is this I would say integration of different forms of spirituality and how you find your way through Christian spirituality, well, more precisely Ignatian spirituality and Buddhism, and then this ecological consciousness, which is in itself a form of spirituality close to indigenous spirituality. So do you think that there is a sort of, I'm wondering if in terms of reaching an ecological conversion, do you think there is a progress in terms of returning to our body and integrating our minds with our bodies? Because I think there has been this alienation in some forms of spirituality between the mind and the body. And I really connected to what you said about attention to detail, which comes with contemplation and which comes with the practice of meditation, for example, or various other forms of contemplation. So do you think that if we, let's say, work on these practices, do you think that would lead to an ecological conversion in the sense of becoming much more aware of nature?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. One of the things I fear of technology is that, again, it's very cerebral. So we've basically come down to ourselves as we move these little muscles to get the mouse around and our eyeballs, but pretty much our physicality is restricted to that. And I think that can be, I fear that, what that's doing to our sense of self, to our spirituality. And again, this whole devaluation of the physical is, when I read the gospel, I don't see that. I'm afraid, and when I'm a Buddhist, I don't see that, and it's selling us ourselves short, I think, and it's selling our existence short. Like, why wouldn't we glory and celebrate the totality of our being? And so, a meditative practice, I think, is so essential, because it is, as you say, it's getting in touch with detail and sitting there with it. And sometimes detail is very uncomfortable. I did a Vipassana retreat. And so you sit there for 10 days, and basically 10 hours a day, just feeling your body up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's torture. Because every part of your body is screaming. My back is usually pretty good, but it hated me that week, those 10 days. But you realize, wow, this is extraordinary. Being human, being alive, being incarnate is totally extraordinary. And can we celebrate that? And if we're not taking care of our bodies, how are we going to take care of the earth? There's a lot of insight, biblical insight, that we are Adama, which means earth. We're sons and daughters of Adam, as in we're earthlings. And so if we don't start taking care of our bodies, we're never going to take care of earth. That's the most intimate part of Earth that we'll ever know. So it's just an extension. So yeah, I would fully agree, and we have to become embodied. And so these traditions of devaluing the body, of castigating the body, I don't think are very, very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Asta, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, I do. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. Wow. Just the two things that really stuck out to me was when you mentioned the resistance to mental occupation. That was really powerful for me. And I just really wanted to mention how beautiful the relationship is too between the images and your poetry. It really was really beautiful together. But my question is, and I have technically two questions, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on like in the sense of spiritual director, do you have any thoughts on how we can create space for nurturing the human spirit in like non-religious organizations? Like I'm thinking specifically public education and schools, like, because that the trust piece, trust in yourself and trust in the outcome, like that is just so necessary for self-esteem, self-efficacy, courage, all those things. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or guidance, because that's kind of a direction I'd like to take, but I just don't really know where to start, because I just don't know where to start. And then my second question was just, what are your thoughts on using the term harmony instead of balance? Because I find I get very stressed with balance. It feels like if the wind blows, my whole world comes crumbling down. But with harmony, I feel like everything is working together, like more like music, So, but my big question was just, do you have any thoughts on how we could create that space for the human spirit, specifically in education?
Thank you, Asta. I agree. Music is wonderful. I'm a bit of a hack at it. I like to play guitar and such, but harmony is a better word. And again, that allows all kinds of voices and voices and notes to come together in a new way. So yeah, harmony is a better word. Creating space, that's a very good question. It's kind of paradoxical. I've had personal experience, and Martin Tamlin, who works in the Old Growth Forest Project and is himself a teacher and runs all kinds of programs through this Old Growth Forest Project, which is a project here at 100 acres of land that we put into land trust, so it'll never be developed. And it's kind of a large ecological restoration project. So we're removing invasive species and we're restoring native species to this beautiful spot along the Speed River, 100-acre kind of narrow, long tract. And it's funny. So he finds that he's actually more able to talk about kind of native spirituality and Ignatian spirituality as such in the Catholic board. If he tries to bring any kind of thing up in the public board, he immediately hits resistance. So it's funny, like in a sense, the Catholic board is more open to religious dialogue, even interreligious dialogue, than the public board. That's maybe neither here nor there in terms of your question, but if we don't have a space where we can even just kind of announce it or talk about something more than our brains, I guess, or even our physicality, something that allows us to see the mystery of life. If we deny ourselves that, I think we're reducing life to a bare minimum. I once gave a talk a few years ago during COVID to grade 8 students in one of here in the Wentworth County. Wentworth County? Anyway, it was a talk on water. So I thought they asked me to do this. It's H2O awesome, and they do this every year. And they asked me to talk. And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll talk about people I consider saints who have laid down their life basically, or have this reverential relationship to water." And so I was talking about all these people. I talked about the Buddha, who was enlightened by the river. I talked about Jesus, who was baptized in the river. I talked about Saint every once in a while I lose my memory. Anyway, let's talk about saints, and I ended up with Berta Cáceres, who was, I would call her an ecological martyr. She's a Honduran woman from the Lenca people, and she fought to save her river, which is considered sacred to the Lenca people, from hydroelectric dam being built. And she was murdered, basically, and they've traced it back to the actual company. She had won an international, very, very prestigious international environmental award a couple of years before. So this was a big deal that they killed her. And there's still kind of impunity in those who ordered the kill, the assassination. Anyway, I was talking about this, and they just cut me off because all these people from the public school board were concerned that I was talking about spirituality. They couldn't even hear it. And I was talking about the Hindu people for whom the Ganges is a sacred, billion Hindus for whom the Ganges is sacred. Any talk of spirituality or something more was just anathema to them. So that they literally shut me down. They just pulled the plug, and I couldn't quite believe it. So we can't even talk about, like, how do we just erase people's reality? Like, how do we just kind of snuff out a billion Hindus and just say that they don't, their beliefs don't matter? You can't talk about that kind of stuff because somehow it's oppressive. Well, I mean, all of a sudden the oppressed become the oppressors, it seems to me. So how do we become very careful? And that's when I said what's most important about leadership, I think, is compassion and understanding. And so that we don't get caught in our own, I mean, ideology is a very, very dangerous thing wherever it happens. So how do we meet people as people and again, allow them to bring who they are to the circle? So I don't know. I wish I knew. I mean, because if it doesn't happen in the educational realm, I don't know where it's going to happen. But sometimes I get a bit scared that how it's going to happen there if these institutions can't even countenance difference in a certain way, like which is all again paradoxical because they're so all the equity, it says no, we have to respect difference, and yet if it's different from their difference, you don't belong, basically. So yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. I appreciate the reality check. Thank you.
Thanks, Asta.
Gabrielle, do you want to ask our final question?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to make a comment, and if you want to add on to it. When you were describing the type of leadership that you're doing within the spiritual direction, but even in what you just said around, like, how can we talk about spirituality in a more public sphere or in not explicitly religious environments, I thought about maybe a competency that maybe a lot of people don't think is part of leadership, but as the holding space for people, creating a space for people. And that's what I heard when you were talking about what you're doing in spiritual direction. And I think, and even that compassion that you were talking about, what we need as a leader. So like, I think that's a capacity that we can build within ourselves of how can we hold space, and that's how we can try to bring more people along with us on this journey. So I don't know if you wanted to say more, but I just to kind of link it back to leadership and what can we concretely do. And I think that's something we can kind of see where we can go with that. And
yeah, thank you, Gabrielle. That. Yeah, very, very good. And I see a few people put up their thumbs to your comments, and absolutely. And that, I think that requires the most courage to do. I mean, because you're basically saying, I'm not in control here. If you open up a space, anything can happen in a sense. So you're really, that takes a lot of courage to open up space and not to think I've got to run the show here. So, I mean, there's immense trust amount in opening space. But if we don't do that, things go off the rails, I think. So yeah. So I fully agree. Open space, and again, when you open up the space in the forest, for example, if a tree falls, or even if you select a vlog and you do it meaningful, significant, like with compassion and tenderness, new trees arise. So things that wouldn't be able to flourish are all of a sudden given sunlight and nutrients. So again, it's all a matter of, it seems to me, being open enough to create open space. And that's not always easy, but it's wonderful. What else are we here for? Both leaders and, I mean, I guess in a sense, we're all leaders at one time and not leaders at others. So how do we be in those spaces in the ways that we're called to at that particular time?
Great. Thank you so much for your questions. It looks like we're coming up to the end of this particular conversation. So I just want to thank Greg for his time and thoughtfulness today, and for joining us for this discussion. Also, thank you to Mikhail for being the facilitator of the interview, and for all those who are attending. Thank you so much for your presence today. I just want to give a shout out to the fact that the Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality is still accepting applications for the fall semester, 2022-2023 academic year. If you find this conversation interesting, you might find our programs interesting. So I encourage everyone who's attending to check out some of the information that Gabrielle has kindly posted in the chat. We also have a variety of different professional development programming as well, such as our leadership and well-being program that runs every year with our colleague Bianca. So if you're interested in non-academic programs, then again, please consider some of the information that Gabrielle has posted in the chat.